it's Wednesday. It's such a beautiful day on the calendar of the week, and it means one thing and one thing only, and that is episode 2 of the Pos-cast with Rabbi Shmuel Posner and myself, Seth Hellman. Rabbi, how you doing today?
Baruch Hashem, good. You're right. The sun is coming up. It's getting cloudy. It's getting rainy. But one thing runs through the entire weather system. Pos-cast number 2.
So before the next episode comes out, we're gonna hit Lag BaOmer. It's a pretty important day on the calendar, I'd say. So I'm curious if you have thoughts or stories, Chabad type stories with Lag BaOmer. What's your what's gonna be the thing that gets left out of the Shabbos email this week?
Interesting. I think one of the things, if you look at Chabad in general, you'll notice that certain things that the Rebbe wanted people to be Shomer Torah mitzvahs. The Rebbe wanted Jews to be informed of the importance of studying Torah and keeping mitzvahs. And every mitzvah, any mitzvah, though the Rebbe did choose certain specific mitzvahs, the 10-point mitzvah campaign, which the Rebbe thought like those mitzvahs are fundamental mitzvahs that would lead to in themselves, and that they would lead to other mitzvahs like love your fellow Jews, study Torah, put on tefillin, mezuzah, for the women candlelighting, Friday night candlelighting, having a kosher kitchen, having family purity, mikvah, so having a house full of svarim, having books, Jewish books in your home. These are fundamental things that set the tone in a home. But then there were other things that the Rebbe sort of zeroed in and focused on them and made them much bigger than was emphasized in the general Jewish community. Let's take, for example, Hanukkah, right? Hanukkah. Everybody loves Hanukkah. Hanukkah is it's right up there. It's one of the most popular, quote unquote, Jewish traditions that all Jews get involved. We're going to get into details why, because of the season, all that kind of stuff. Put that aside. So the Rebbe comes out with this idea of public menorah lighting. And truthfully speaking, when it first started, there was a Supreme Court decision. It was a whole big deal, and many cities and towns have to struggle with this. But if you talk to anybody in America and you say, what symbolizes Hanukkah? They'll say the public menorah, the huge menorahs. Now, this is unheard of in the history of the Jewish people. This never ever happened, that you should put these huge 10 feet, 20 feet, 6 feet, whatever it is, menorahs in public places, in the outdoors especially. And then you go into shopping malls and you go into business. There you have menorah. So the Rebbe took Hanukkah and used it as a tool, to get the mitzvah done, people recognize what it is, and to bring Jews closer to Judaism. So how many people have met a Chabad rabbi and a menorah lighting, and one thing leads to the next, and more mitzvahs are getting done? And you can tell that like a minor thing, because no one would say there's a mitzvah to have a menorah outdoors. Does it somehow fall into the category of Prisum Nisa, publicizing the miracle? Yes, that's for sure. But to say there's an actual mitzvah that somewhere in Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law, or somewhere else would say this is something that should be done. No, it definitely falls under the realm of halachically correct. But nonetheless, for example, every single person who's at that menorah lighting outdoors has to go home and light their own menorah because they light it in the outdoors. But we don't want to talk about Hanukkah now because Lag BaOmer is the subject. Lag BaOmer is another thing like that. It's a day on the calendar. It's not a Torah holiday. It's not a rabbinic holiday. It's more like a custom. But it's connected to Rabbi Shimon Yochai. It's connected to, the passing of Rabbi Shimon Yochai, Rashbi, who's buried in Meron, who is the author of the Zohar, and also a very prominent member of the Mishnaic Council. And also that the students of Rabbi Kiva, who were dying during the times of the sphere, they didn't die. They stopped dying in Lag BaOmer. Okay, it's definitely a day that's marked by Jews everywhere, but it's not like something huge and it's something you do. Schools will take their kids to a park. There'll be bonfires, even in the United States, in Israel, that's huge. And in the United States also, some shuls have a little bonfire, a little dancing, a little program. Everybody goes home, everything's fine and good. The Rebbe took this and used it and said, we're going to focus on Jewish children. And so the famous Lag BaOmer parades in New York, where the Rebbe, they would build a platform in front of 770, the Rebbe would come out and would address the children, talking to them in Yiddish, and Rabbi Jacob, J.J. Hecht, Rabbi Yankov Yehuda Hecht, a blessed memory, would translate it, and there'd be like thousands of children, and there were floats, and there were signs. I mean, it first started out with like walking on the little side road in front of 770, and they had signs, keep Shabbos. You see like these walking single file, a couple of hundred kids carrying these signs on white poster board, and that's how it's like. And it came into huge floats that Yeshiva Baruch worked on, after, not during Torah study time, worked on these floats I remember I was working on making a barn. I'm not even sure what the float was about anymore. Maybe it was Shabbos. I was like, that was my idea, make a barn. So if anybody needs a barn, call me. Anyway, so, and thousands of kids would march in front of, calm yourself.
I'm sorry, I'm just imagining a young Rabbi Posner with a hammer and a nail building what I can only imagine when he calls it a barn was no more than like 3 feet tall.
Approximately, yeah. There were no live animals in it. Anyway, so this became like this huge thing, and then the Rebbe spoke about this in such powerful terms. By the way, it'd be interesting if you look up to what the Rebbe spoke about at these Lag BaOmer parades. Famously, Lag BaOmer is like in May. In 1967, the Rebbe spoke at Eretz Yisrael. Powerful. You're standing listening to the Rebbe and say there's, I'd say, 5,000 children standing in front of the Rebbe. He's saying, the Rebbe is not talking to them. This has nothing to do with them. What do they know about the strength of Jews in Israel, and that they shouldn't worry, and Hashem's going to protect them? And the Rebbe gives this powerful talk that gets sent to Israel and is played in Israel and to the government officials, and the way they tell it is such a powerful effect on them, because the morale then was really like shaky. They didn't know what was going on, what was going to happen. And so the Rebbe's talking at a Lag BaOmer parade. There was another time that I was there, and the Rebbe started talking, probably 20 minutes, half an hour, in Russian. A message for the Russian government that according to their constitution, there's freedom of religion. Again, we're standing at a Lag BaOmer parade. Now, was this a random thing the Rebbe's using the opportunity? No, absolutely not. And in fact, the Rebbe saw the power of the children to affect these things. Like by you kid, and the Rebbe said it to these children, like to give them a talk and ignore them. That by you being strong in your Torah mitzvahs, that can affect the power of the Jews around the world. That was one of the things the Rebbe emphasized a lot to the children, that it's from the power, based on the verse in Tehillim, from the mouths of nursing children and little babies, Hashem draws His strength. In other words, when these little children are, when they're able to talk or mumbling words of Torah, that brings great strength to Hashem. So that was just some of the amazing occurrences that happened in Lag BaOmer parade. But then the Rebbe said, make these all over the world. So now you look around, there's all over the world, literally, they have these huge Lag BaOmer parades. In Israel, every town has these parades. And what does it do? It lifts the pride of the Jewish kids, that they should be proud to be Jewish, and it's a time for them to celebrate and focus on them. So this is another example of a holiday that was not really, emphasized. It was recognized, no one denies that, but it wasn't such a huge thing to incorporate and bring it down into the daily lives of Jewish children. And these children that come to these parades, they're not necessarily, the parades by the Rebbe would normally happen on Sunday. Why Sunday? So the public school kids can come. That was really focused on. Then a couple of times they did it even during the week. But that was really the focus, was to get those not yet observant children, that they should participate in a Lag BaOmer parade. And the theme of it is always Jewish unity and Jewish pride, which is so important.
One of the big traditions around Lag BaOmer is the Lag BaOmer haircut. Everyone's gone through their 33 days of no haircuts, but there are different traditions, shall we say, surrounding the cutting of hair, right? So Chabad in particular, no shaving at all. Forget Lag BaOmer for the year, right? For forever, right? So where does that particular tradition come from compared to, there are many observant Jews who either during Lag BaOmer will shave on Friday night because they have the tradition to shave in preparation for Shabbos, or during the year they keep themselves clean shaven because that's what they do. But they're still observant Jews. What's the difference in interpretation?
Okay. Interesting. So in fact, the custom of Chabad is specifically not to take a haircut on Lag BaOmer. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what the reason is, but I can only imagine. It's such a holy, special day, and you're like worrying about how long your hair is. Like, get over it, move on. But one specific haircut that does take place on Lag BaOmer is the upsharon, the first haircut for a 3-year-old boy. And personal little plug here, I can't tell you the exact location, but I can tell you the time, 4:30 in Hamden, Connecticut. Our grandson, Shalom, is going to have his first haircut.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. So, and in fact, on Lag BaOmer, they would have a float. One of the float was parents, fathers, with their sons, with their upsharon thing, and each one would hold this scissor and they go by the Rebbe, and that was such a beautiful thing. By the way, one of the things that the Rebbe would do is he would wave his hand. He'd like sort of hold his hand on, leaning on his lectern, on his stender, on his elbow, and he would like just keep on. I'm showing it to him here, and no one can see. But he'd be flapping his hand up and down as like waving,
bending his fingers down at a right angle compared to the rest of his hand. For those of you who haven't seen this before,
right? And that was very powerful. I have a little personal story about that, which I told once. I told it to a group of children at the yeshiva here. They were having some kind of celebration for the Rebbe's birthday, and I told them this story. And then I told it over at the Chabad house Friday night. And when you talk at the Chabad house Friday night, sometimes people are listening, and then sometimes not everybody's listening. And I just remember this. I don't know why. I have a picture in my mind, like how everybody froze and was so like taken in by the story. So I'll share this very, very personal story with you. So when I was like 6 years old, I had an accident with my eye. Okay. And I was wearing, it was pretty primitive. Now looking back how they treated it, like, oh my God, I can't believe that. But basically I had an eye patch. It was like a thick gauze eye patch. It was probably like, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch at least thick, and maybe more. And that was put over my eye. And to keep it in place, the doctor literally had a roll of Scotch tape, although I'm not advertising the brand, but it was Scotch tape on his desk, and he would take a piece of Scotch tape and put it from above my eyelid, my eyebrows, over the patch down to my cheek. That's how and a couple of pieces to keep that eye patch in place. And then there was a protective thing made out of like, I don't think it was plastic, more like some kind of metal or iron, that would go on top of the gauze pad to keep it in place. That also was Scotch taped to my face. I'm not making this up. And every few weeks I would have to go there. Actually, my mother, bless her memory, and live long and be well, my younger sister was then a child, so she was home with my younger sister. And so my grandfather, my mother's father, Allah Shalom, he would take me to the doctor to get this checkup. I remember those trips. Anyway, I would go into the doctor, and he'd like take off the Scotch tape, look at the eye, and then put it back on again. Anyway, so that was the story. Now, when I was 7 years old, I was like 7 or 8 years old at that time, I was very shy. I tend to be very shy now as well.
Wait a minute.
No, this is true. This is true.
I'm calling no. Well, the thing, fine. I won't debate on you what happened 50 years ago, but I'll debate with you now. You're not shy now.
50? Who's talking about 50 years ago? Oh, I forgot. Anyway, so people would, say, every time you go, somebody say something, and I was like, oh, just leave me alone. Like, little boy, where'd you get it from? I just didn't like it. And so there came the Lag BaOmer parade. And so I was talking I'm going to break this, my personal story, go back to the kids. I was trying to tell the children in the yeshiva here that I was talking to how much the Rebbe cares about every single child. Like the Rebbe, even though he's this huge, big Rebbe, but, and you look at you see by dollars how the Rebbe, especially to children, each child went by, even babies that women were holding in their hands, the Rebbe would make sure to put the dollar, not to give it to the mother, but to put it on top, like sort of give it to the baby. either put it into the hand or just put it onto the baby. So he actually gave it to the baby. So, how every single child, and this is what I was trying to say to these kids, they know the Rebbe, they heard of the Rabbi Rebbe, they've seen pictures of him, what does it mean to me? And to tell them, to each one of you, the Rebbe cared about each child and emphasize that everything that every single child does is really, really important to Hashem, and by extension to the well-being of all the Jewish people. So, and I said, this is my story I'm going to tell you, and you're going to see what happened. And I told them this story. It's like this. There was this little boy, and I didn't say it was this little boy who had this accident, and he was very, very embarrassed because people always talked about him and make a thing, and he just didn't like being in public and and having to deal with all that attention. And he was walking by, during the prayer, he's walking by the Rebbe, and he looks up. Now, the truth of the matter is the platform, it was probably 10 feet off the ground, but this little boy, it was like the Rebbe, he looked up and saw the Rebbe and thought the Rebbe was 4 stories up. And he looked up, the Rebbe looked down at him, and he waved his hand at the little boy. And the little boy said, wow, the Rebbe looked directly at me and waved at me. He felt so good, he felt so important, he felt so comfortable about himself that from then on, he just didn't really care what people thought about him. And they said to the kids, and you know how I know how this little boy felt? Because that little boy was me. and there's a guy in the Chabad 20 years ago, he'll still say, and that little boy was me. So that's just a little personal story that happened at the Fabring. But really, the fact that there's a little story about Lag BaOmer prayer with the Rebbe. So they had a little program before the Rebbe came out, and there was one famous rabbi, Rabbi Yosef Goldstein. He made a number of recordings back in the day called Uncle Yossi, and he would tell stories. He was very well known. He was actually a principal in a not Lubavitch school in Borough Park. Anyway. So he would come up there, and everyone would say Shema Yisrael together, and a couple other, the 12 psukim that the Rebbe instituted that children should know by heart. They would say those when the Rebbe came out. So they had a program. They had a famous singer. I'm not going to mention his name because we don't do that on this program. But
you literally said last week that we were going to be name dropping so that everyone should be careful.
I don't remember that. But anyway, so this famous singer came, and he was on the program, but somehow there was some kind of confusion. I don't know exactly the details that happened. The Rebbe came out and he started singing. Now to be singing in front of the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, he wasn't necessarily a Lubavitcher Chassid, but he was well aware. He had come to the Rebbe for blessings, and and everybody recognized how great the Rebbe was. To be able to sing in front of the Rebbe, Tim, this is, I can't say he speaks from person, but it would seem that that's more important than having a concert with 10,000 people and getting paid whatever he got paid. To be able to sing in front of Lubavitcher Rebbe, amazing. So he starts singing one song, and then he starts another song, and the Rebbe turns to his assistant, to Rabbi Lebelgroner, and said something to the effect of, I don't have time for concerts today. I need to go to the Oyel. The Oyel is the burial place of the Rebbe's father-in-law. In fact, the Rebbe once said about this, that you should go to a burial place of a tzaddik. Everybody goes to Meron, if you can. 100,000 people go to Meron, where the burial place of Rabbi Shimon Yochai is. But if you can't go there, you should go to the burial place of any tzaddik, because all tzaddikim are connected, whatever. So anyway, that was the Rebbe's custom. Lag BaOmer, after the parade, he would go to the burial place of his father-in-law. Now, it's about a half an hour drive to get there. And then the Rebbe would spend hours there and then come back, sometimes make a farbrengen afterwards, whatever. But he turns to the secretary and says, I don't have time for this, for this performance, paraphrasing, because I need to go to the Oyel. So quickly, this Rabbi Zgarna turns to the singer and sort of makes, cut. And, probably within seconds, it was over. Now, the singer was a little disappointed, and I don't know the background story. I'm sure somebody confused something on the schedule, whatever. That's not important. But the point was that after that singing stopped, then the 12 psukim were recited. After that, the Rebbe spoke, probably 2 or 3 talks, that's an hour at least. Then the Rebbe stood there, probably for 2 hours, waving at the children walking by. So the question is this: the Rebbe just said, "I don't have time for this." Now, the Rebbe wouldn't embarrass somebody publicly, right? That wasn't his intention, God forbid. But just that I just can't stand here listening to somebody singing songs, as good as it is and all that, because I have a schedule I have to do today. But then he stands for 2 hours waving at little children. So what does that mean? What that means very simply is that what's vitally important is vitally important. Yes, I don't have extra time for something which is not important, but for this is very important. So that emphasized the amazing importance of little Jewish children. And that I think that's the message of Lag BaOmer that we can take for all of us. It's not just for little children. In general, we all have that little child in us, which is really what we're trying to get at. Here at Chabad, we look beyond the external college student or young adult or old adult, whatever you are. We want to find the little child in you, the child that really believes in Hashem because Hashem is Hashem. And, people, you meet somebody, put on film, do this, and there's always excuse, always stories. And then you look at them, it's like, come on. When I try to get kids put on film, the students put on film on campus, it's not like this long, drawn-out philosophical debate or whether it should or shouldn't, you should or shouldn't do it. Those don't get anywhere. You just look at it and say, come on, it's a mitzvah. You have time for it. And so, I don't have no time. Yeah, you do. You have time. So anyway, I think that's a little insight into Lag BaOmer. You can read more about it on Chabad.org.
There are a number of students walking around Boston University right now who have been late to class at one point or another because this crazy man wearing a jacket with a long white beard said, you have time to wrap to fill in and it'll be okay. And it probably was okay because college classes are a sham. So oops. I say that on my final day of college classes.
Oh, mazel tov.
Beautiful. I still have a final left to go, but yeah, I mean, I've stepped in a classroom for the last time as far as learning goes. It's a weird feeling. I guess I'm just gonna get dumber as time goes on now because I'm not in class. Is that how that works? When you're not in school, you don't learn anymore. Obviously not, but
I think that learning that is dictated to you is less effective than learning that what you really want to do. So I'm going to make this public announcement that I really think you should go to yeshiva for at least a month in the summer.
See, me and Rabbi have this, it's not even a back and forth conversation. It's mostly just the Rabbi saying, hey, go to yeshiva, go to yeshiva, go to yeshiva. Hey, when are you going to yeshiva? And I don't think it's, I'm trying to figure out how to put this. I'm not hesitant to do it in the sense of I would love to go to yeshiva, but there are a lot of things that need to be sorted out. I have certain plans.
I've heard this stuff too many times. I'm sorry. I know in this setting I shouldn't be cutting you off, but I'm not. No, but the thing is this, and here's the deal: people do what's important for them to do. You know, there's this. It's always the same thing. It's only a question of priorities. Even the kids that I'll meet say, no, I'm just going to go do this, and then I'll come back and put on film. Right? It's like, just do it. It takes 3 minutes. It's not a big deal. It's not like I'm going to ask you for an hour of your time. But it's priorities. If you want to do it, you can do it. If you don't want to, you don't want to do it. The same thing when people say, like, I forgot to put on film this morning. And, the classic answer is, you didn't forget to get dressed before you. You're not walking around the streets without your pants on because you had no time or you forgot. No, because it's like something you have to do. So the same thing is you have to, that's it. The value of going to yeshiva when you don't have anything over your head, number one is you don't have to be there. And there's nothing that you have to come back to, even if you have something to come back to later, but you're there out of your own free volition. This is what I want to do is you're able to focus completely on Torah study, and Torah study that doesn't bring to action is not good, is not proper. So you're basically solidifying who you are as a Jew. I say this to you and I say this to anybody listening. It's very clear to me that anybody who has spent any significant amount of time in yeshiva will have a completely different relationship to who they are to their Judaism, and to Torah study afterwards. The appreciation is just immeasurably greater, and it's a great mitzvah. Learning Torah is a major mitzvah that we need to do. So yes, going to yeshiva is a wonderful and great thing.
I just don't know if I have the attention span for it. Learning for 8 hours a day at least for a month straight. I mean, I wasn't that great of a student in high school.
Are you graduating college?
Yeah, I would argue that I worked harder in high school than I did in college.
All right, so we'll continue this conversation privately, but just to say that when something is important or interesting to a person, they study it very well. It's the motivation is there, and if when you're like learning a piece of Talmud and like there's a question, you want to know what the answer is and what this one says, that one says, and you get into it and you have the right perspective, I think it becomes a very valuable experience.
Do they have fancy graphics and charts in yeshiva?
Nowadays, I think they've updated to that. When I was in yeshiva, it was black and white, and that was it. Read the letters on the page. Now I think they definitely have done that. They've come up with graphs with different colors to deal with the new generation.
I think we've hit our time for this week. So this has been the Pos-cast, episode 2. With Rabbi Shmuel Posner and myself, Seth Hellman. Thank you so much for joining us and for listening through this episode. We'll be back next week, same time, same place.